I'd like to call to order the August 6th Committee on Joint School Services meeting. I don't really have much to report as far as the chairman's report goes today. Mr. Arrett has quite a bit of information to go over in regards to his committees and their findings. So, Mr. Arrett, I'm going to pass it on over to you.
All right, well, thank you. I will start the governance subcommittee. Last week, of course, we presented our memo of findings and recommendations, and we have amended one portion of that with the requisite language to include that post-appointment of a consolidated school board, we would be making efforts in both jurisdictions to move to a referendum to convert to elected school boards. That is already contained in the memo, the revised memo. We have also talked in governance, the policy manual portion of that we had sort of left undone pending updates from both school divisions. And we had also reached out to the Virginia School Board Association to see if they would be willing to provide a service for policy manual merger. They responded back to us that that was not a service that they could see themselves entering into, so we have moved for adoption of language in the policy manual recommendation portion of the governance memo to be as follows. That the combined school board adopt policies and procedures which resolve obvious conflicts and amend or use either of the two existing policy and procedures manuals for operational use during the 2022-2023 school year. So I have been in touch with the majority of the governance subcommittee, and everyone that I've talked to thus far is in agreement with the adoption of that language. So I will be amending that and putting it back out to everyone in its totality very shortly. The Finance Committee met yesterday and went over our Finance Subcommittee memorandum, and I assume everyone has had a chance to review that document. I can read over it in full if that's the pleasure of everyone. Is that what we would like to see? Okay.
Whatever.
Well, I'll start from the top.
Everybody's seen it, Jonathan. Do you need to read it?
Probably not. I mean, we can have a section by section discussion, or if you'd like for me to narrate once again, I'm happy to do whatever's needed. So.
It doesn't matter to me. I just, I've read through it. I don't really need you to read it to me again, but if somebody hasn't read it or would like to hear the thing in its entirety, I'm good with that too.
Okay. Well, in absence of a complete reading of the document, maybe it would be best we kind of split the difference here and go over it section by section. Obviously, the background there in section 1 just talks about how many times we have met and the different things we have concerned ourselves with, being the cost savings or efficiencies gained in consolidation, yearly budget process, the ERIT package, or early retirement incentive, and then future capital expenses. The findings, obviously, Mr. Regenbaugh, Mr. Salmon's document was the backbone of evidence of cost savings, which is what is required we show per the state's statutory requirements. The yearly budget process is a very important part of the Finance Subcommittee's discussions, and a lot of time was spent talking about how that would work and historical impediments even in our own backyard between Allegheny County and Clifton Forge. So we explored many of those ideas, ranging from exactly what a formula could look like to negotiation and reconciliation, to the idea of debt service that we have talked about, the Joint School Services Committee has discussed in the past. Also, term length for a budget agreement was talked about, and different examples from around the state were explored. So our findings, or our recommendations rather, are that we use the feasibility for consolidation of Covington City and Allegheny County divisions authored by Mr. Reginbald and Mr. Salmon to show the evidence of cost savings. Everyone on the Finance Subcommittee was unanimous in that we agree with the conclusions Mr. Salmon and Mr. Reginbald made, in that clearly there are some significant savings to be had, or the possibilities are there for that. Yearly budget process, per pupil funding formula is the simplest way to go about that, so that would be our recommendation as far as the formulation of a yearly budget, per pupil basis. Conference committees obviously are a very simple way to resolve any variances, and you can see evidence of conference committees through all levels of government. So that would be our recommendation for any resolutions that need to come forth. No disagreement by anyone on the Finance Subcommittee as far as debt service retirement. So each locality would retain any debt service obligations. And as far as term agreements budget term agreements, 3 to 5 years seems to be about the sweet spot. There's competing interests between continuity and stability, and also having a period of time that allows flexibility for changing fiscal conditions with each either locality. So somewhere between 3 and 5 year terms for your budget agreement would probably be the best, and therefore that's what the subcommittee would recommend. An adoption of an ERIP program, recognizing that there are limitations and constraints on such a program, but the consolidated division should, to the best of its ability, opt to adopt an ERIP program that would facilitate achieving ideal staffing levels. And then for future capital expenses, the subcommittee had discussed in some detail the idea of sharing some formula, so a per pupil formula, for example, as the basis for even capital expenditures, understanding that there's a lot more complexity that could potentially enter into a capital outlay. And examples of that would be, Casey Field, where a consolidated division would certainly utilize Casey Field, but obviously ownership and administration lies with the city of Covington. So there would need to be some negotiations for, how things would go about in relation to, some of the more specific instances around the community. So that's the broad strokes of the finance memo. Does anyone have any questions about that? Mr. Griffith and I, either one can answer those. Mr. Griffith, did you have anything to add to that? I kind of went over the high points there.
I'm good, John.
Okay. Well, with that, then that's all I have for governance and finance. So we can have any further discussion you'd like, Mr. Wright?
All right. Does anyone have any other questions on governance and finance? If not, I do apologize. I had to come by the school board office for this call, and I didn't have my computer in front of me, and I realized that we skipped over the approval of minutes that Christy had sent out earlier in the meeting. So I would like to go back to that and go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Have a motion by Mr. Tucker. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Garten. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Well, with that being said, is there anything else we need to bring before the group?
When we're gonna get the rest of the reports from you, Jacob?
As far as the facilities report, you've gotten that? Curriculum is still working on theirs, but that's not really a part of the state. As far as our punch list for the state, that was covered in the fiscal analysis.
I think we need to get a detailed information, what we're gonna have.
We had actually contacted the attorneys about that, and I haven't. Let me just look here. I haven't received that yet. No, I just want to make sure I hadn't received it. We have asked the attorneys for basically a timeline or a punch list of other things we need to knock out. Mr. Lanford, I see you've taken your volume off your mute off. Mr. Unitas?
Yeah. Are you getting ready to ask us a question, or is this an opportunity to make a statement?
Well, I was actually going to ask Mr. Lanford. He had a phone conversation with one of them.
There you go.
Mr. Cobb and some folks from Strategies are preparing the schedule. I have not received it back yet, but I asked them for that on Tuesday morning of this week, and they indicated they would put something together and send it out shortly. But I would, folks, when a group of us traveled to Richmond early this year, and at that meeting with the delegate and senator, Board of Education staff, and the Trouton Strategies and legal team, there was a request that a document be delivered to the staff at the DOE, Department of Education, in September, their review, to allow time for it to be presented possibly at an October or November meeting of the State Board of Education. They do not meet in December, and that was result of a request from the delegate and the senator to have it not only approved locally, but also have been considered and approved by BOE before they carry anything into a session 2021.
And I also think it's important to keep in mind, as Mr. Eric has continually reminded us in all of our full committee meetings, of the Virginia Code requirements for going through a feasibility of consolidation, that what the state, and as far as Virginia Department of Education and what General Assembly would be looking to review, is surface level analyses of the requirements relating to funding formula, relating to recommended facility utilization, to governance proposal. They're not looking for the granular details of the nuts and bolts. It is at that surface level. And then I think the other crucial component of this at this point is making sure that there is public information available on this process. I know there's been discussions on the flyer. I do think that that's going to be critical prior to heading into the polling process, which is also something that's been recommended by the advisors from Trouton and Sanders and others.
Right. So basically what we need to do is and I don't know if Mr. Lanford has received any more information or any more comments on his on the fact or fiction flyer that we worked on. That is something that we are going to need to vote on to get out. I also think that we're going to need to decide as a committee that we approve a plan. But so today we have our governance and finance memos that have passed those two committees. We have our facilities memo that's already passed. I think that's about it as far as our requirements on the punch list. Is that am I wrong on that?
My question was, Jacob, out of all the subcommittees, this group should be able to see everything, the whole picture, even though it don't go to the requirements of the code, but we should be able to see the whole picture. That's what this committee is here for. That's the reason.
Is there some?
Go ahead, Jake.
Is there something that you feel like is missing, Mr. Griffith?
Yeah, you have the transportation report. What's the deal there? What's the deal with curriculum? Even though it may not be the requirement but this committee should be able to see it all.
I think as it relates specifically to curriculum, and I would imagine transportation would be very similar, not having served on either subcommittee, but curriculum, the requirements that the state would ask us to show are largely contained within that feasibility study that Mr. Regibaugh and Mr. Salmon performed, and what we'll want to put before the curriculum subcommittee then is sort of a checking off on the requisite demographics and other material to make sure that all of us on the local end are comfortable with that data. And then any other discussions, I think to Mr. Griffith's point, the curriculum subcommittee has had and will continue to have other discussions as to curriculum possibilities, and some of those things are not required by the state. But I agree, everyone who's not on that curriculum subcommittee should have a chance to sort of review at least a working summary of where that committee has been going. So I wouldn't think that's a bridge too far for.
So,
well, I can go ahead and speak to that. As far as the curriculum subcommittee, subcommittee had talked about the idea of 2 high schools, and we had talked about that a little bit in our last meeting. So the curriculum subcommittee met again on Tuesday and discussed some different things, including the profile of a Virginia graduate. And also we kind of talked about the idea of a 2 high school system. So it was my thought that the curriculum committee should see if the facilities committee was interested in passing along or changing their memo to entertain the idea of a 2 high school system. So on Wednesday, the facilities committee met, and the facilities committee basically decided that they thought it would be in the best interest to retain their idea of a K through 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 through 12. So that is something that's going to have to get passed back to the facilities committee. With that being said, back to the curriculum committee. With that being said, it's really hard to come up with a transportation plan when you're not sure where your schools are going to be. And currently the county works with the TransFinder group for our transportation plans, our routing, that kind of thing. The city does not work with a transportation company on their routing. So basically that's going to be a lot of just data entry stuff to pick up the routes and figure out routes and things like that. Any of us on the committee realize that if the kids from Potts Creek, if we in a merged system, they would go to Edgemont, Jeter, Watson. I think that other than Covington being a middle school, we're still going to be picking all the same kids up at all the same places. And so, really what we have to decide is, and it seems like our facilities committee is pretty well set on the idea of the middle school versus high middle school and high school plan. So we'll just have to go from there. But a lot of these committees are kind of intertwined, and they kind of bounce off of each other. And that's one of the reasons that like Ms. Onitis said, we kind of want to keep it surface level. We don't want to get too deep involved, but there are decisions that have to be made before a transportation plan can come about. And so it looks like, according to our facility study, that our facilities group yesterday, that they definitely want to stick with that middle school and high school plan. So we'll be able to move forward with that.
Question, Jake.
Right.
An excellent job putting summaries together. Just put us a summary together where we can look at it. And,
Put what together?
put a summary together of all the committees you've been heading up. Jonathan did an excellent job.
Well, I gotta tell you, Mr. Griffin, that the governance and finance are pretty cut and dry. They don't really bounce off of each other like the other committees do. The curriculum, the facilities, and those things. So now that it seems like we're pretty well set on what we're going to use for facilities, I don't know if you have a problem with the facilities memo that went out.
I don't have a problem with it. I just want to know, are we going to have new tech and conventional education? Just put us a summary together. It shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, well, now that we're focused on what we're going to do as far as the high schools go, high school and middle school, then this group is going to start working on that. I can tell you that the curriculum subcommittee meetings have been some of the most energetic and thought-provoking and exciting subcommittee meetings I've been a part of. And Mr. Tucker, maybe you'd like to speak to that. You've been part of all those meetings.
I agree. You said it all there as to what we're doing. We're still working on a plan. We're still looking at 2 high schools and that type of thing, which is basically 2 magnet schools, fine arts and then technology. We have said that we would probably still have new tech, and but instead of forcing everybody to go into new tech, we'd give the students and parents the opportunity to decide whether they want to do it or not. Because basically you do have people who learn better under project-based learning, you have people who learn better under traditional classroom and other things. So, it's one of those things that I don't think that we will be able to come up with a really detailed thing, including a master schedule or something of that nature in the amount of time that we have. But, we're working on that, and we'll see what happens. We'll continue to work on a single high school and middle school as the facilities committee has recommended. But that's about
And
it.
Mr. Griffith, I would invite you to be a part of any of those conversations that you would like to be a part of, and then maybe you have a better understanding of what we're dealing with and how all these things are a little bit more intertwined.
So Jacob,
Yes, sir.
a summary is a great idea. I think we need the summary to get the fact sheet together. I would almost say I was attacked last night, for lack of a better word, about how this thing's going. And what the person had received was a bunch of misinformation. And if we had a fact sheet, it would be a whole lot easier to say, here's what's the truth. I had to go through item by item to kind of explain where everything was at. The person was adamantly opposed to one high school with nothing but new tech. I mean, that was their biggest gripe. But we need the fact sheet that can come off of the summary. I think we need that before we send a survey out. If we send a survey out right now, people would be going on misinformation that they're hearing on the street.
I don't think there's any thoughts on giving out a survey right now. I mean, I'm on board with the fact sheet. I mean, if everybody's on board with it, I don't know how many people have told Mr. Eric that they are on board with it, but I have, and I'm more than happy to go ahead and vote on that right now. You know, my only issue with the fact sheet, and Mr. Eric and I have talked about this several times, is that I would like the format just to be a little bit different so it's a little easier for people to read.